I want to start today with a visual. It's pretty cinematic. I want you to picture maybe like a drone shot, panning over this small, dusty town.
Okay.
It's evening. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, and the sky is that deep, bruised purple. And for the last 24 hours, the streets have been, well, dead silent. Nothing moving. A ghost town.
Which, just for context, that silence was a legal requirement. It wasn't just a quiet day.
Right, but the moment that sun disappears and the restrictions end, the whole place just explodes. Suddenly, the streets are alive, they're shouting, torches are being lit, there's just movement. A massive crowd is pouring like water through these narrow alleys, all toward a single, humble house.
It's a really striking image, and what you're describing, it's not a movie script. It's the hook for our deep dive today. We
Yeah.
are looking at a specific moment captured in the Gospel of Mark.
Specifically, Mark chapter 1, verse 32. And it is a surprisingly short verse for how much we're about to unpack. People brought to Jesus all the sick and those who had demons.
That's it.
That's the tweet.
It is short. But the sources we're digging into today argue there's a mountain of meaning hidden in just those few words. We're not just looking at a historical report of a busy evening.
No.
This one sentence serves as a mirror.
A mirror for who?
For us, for human nature, for how communities function or, fail to function, and ultimately for the character of Jesus himself.
And that's really our mission today. We're taking this stack of notes and commentaries to unpack why this crowd formed, who was in it, and why the source material frames this ancient event as a direct challenge to how we behave today.
It really is asking a pretty uncomfortable question. How do we respond when we're standing at the intersection of, let's say, desperate need and available hope?
So let's get our bearings first. We mentioned the town exploding with activity. We're in Capernaum.
Right.
Now, when I think of biblical cities, I usually picture Jerusalem, big, bustling, impersonal.
Yeah. Stone walls, soldiers.
Exactly. But the source makes a point that Capernaum,
Yeah.
it wasn't like that.
No, Capernaum is a completely different vibe. It wasn't a metropolis. It was a fishing village on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. The source describes it as a close-knit town.
And that social dynamic is crucial.
Oh, it's everything. If you miss that, you miss why the crowd formed so quickly.
It's that small town thing where everybody knows your business.
Right.
You can't hide a fever in a place like that.
Precisely. In a place like Capernaum, life is interconnected. People know each other's stories. They know who is struggling with a chronic illness. They know which family is dealing with what. The source points out that care isn't. It's not organized through institutions.
Right. You're not calling 911 or filling out an intake form.
Exactly. You knock on a door. News travels through relationships. Did you hear about Simon's mother-in-law? Did you see what happened at the synagogue? It's all personal.
It's the ancient version of going viral, but just word of mouth.
And it moves fast.
Okay, but let's talk about the catalyst. Because this crowd didn't just show up for no reason. Something happened earlier that day to light the fuse.
It had been a remarkable Sabbath. I mean, to understand the pressure cooker that went off that evening, you have to look at the morning. Jesus had been in the synagogue.
Right.
And he didn't just read the text. The source notes he taught with authority, which really stood out to people. The scribes, they'd usually quote other experts. Rabbi so-and-so says this. Jesus just spoke.
But good speaking doesn't usually cause a riot.
True, but then he did something undeniable. He cast a demon out of a man right there in the assembly, a public exorcism in the middle of the service.
Okay, that's going to get people talking. That is the kind of thing you run home to tell your spouse.
Absolutely. And it didn't stop there. He went to the house of Simon, Peter, and Andrew, local guys, fishermen, everyone knew, and he healed Peter's mother-in-law.
Of a fever.
Of a fever, which in those days, without antibiotics, could easily be a death sentence. And then suddenly, she's up serving them dinner.
So you have this public display of power over the spiritual realm and a private healing of a well-known local woman.
And in a village like Capernaum, news like that is just, it's impossible to contain. The source says news like this would not remain hidden for long. You can just imagine the whispered conversations all afternoon.
But here's the tension I found so interesting. They knew, the whole town knew there was a healer in Peter's house, but they couldn't move.
Right. And this is where we have to understand the Sabbath. It wasn't just a tradition. It was strict religious law. It governed how far you could walk, what was defined as work.
Carrying a stretcher would be work.
Carrying a stretcher is work. Healing someone, even that could be interpreted as work.
So you have this whole town just holding its breath. They're sitting on this explosive information. They have sick family members, but they're literally watching the sun, waiting for it to set.
And that explains the evening detail in Mark 1.32. By evening, after the Sabbath restrictions ended, that's when the dam broke. The moment the sky went dark, the restrictions lifted, and all that pent-up hope just turned into action.
I really want to zoom in on this crowd. The visual is intense. The source says they were pouring toward the house. But who exactly is in this crowd? Because the verse says, people brought.
This is where the analysis gets fascinating. It wasn't just the sick people dragging themselves there. I mean, if you're paralyzed or if you're in the middle of a psychotic break, you aren't getting there yourself.
Someone had to carry you.
It was family members, it was neighbors, friends. The source even suggests it was likely people bringing those they barely knew. Just total community mobilization.
It is.
And look at the scope of suffering they brought. The source lists physical illnesses, sure, fevers, leprosy, blindness, but also mental and emotional afflictions, and specifically those who had demons.
You know, I feel like we skip over that term demons a lot in modern readings because it feels so ancient.
It does. But the source treats this very seriously. It describes this demon possession as a spiritual bondage that brought great suffering and isolation. Whether you view that through a modern psychological lens or a supernatural one, the effect was devastation. These people were outcasts.
So you have the physically broken, the mentally tormented, and the spiritually oppressed all mixing together in this one narrow street.
And here's the critical observation the source makes, and I think this is one of the key takeaways for our whole deep dive. Mark makes no distinction between these categories.
What do you mean, no distinction?
Well, think about how we function. We triage sympathy. There are acceptable illnesses. If you have a broken leg or cancer, everyone rallies. You get a casserole.
Right. But if you have a manic episode or an addiction or something we see as dark,
Yeah.
people kind of step back, it gets quiet.
Exactly. We categorize. We say, this person deserves help, or this person is too messy. But in this scene and in the text of Mark, there's no separation. Minor ailments versus serious disease, visible suffering versus hidden torment, they were all just brought together in one mass.
And Jesus didn't separate them either. He didn't have a VIP line.
No, he didn't separate people by worthiness or severity. He didn't say, I'll take the fevers, but the spiritual stuff is too heavy for tonight. The source argues this scene is proof that Jesus is sufficient for every kind of brokenness.
That's a strong phrase. Sufficient for every kind of brokenness.
It is. Whether it was physical, psychological, or spiritual, it was all treated as being within his authority. The same authority that silenced the synagogue and cooled the fever was ready for whatever came out of the dark that evening.
You know, this brings me to the part of the notes that really stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah.
We focus so much on Jesus in this story, and rightly so. He's the healer.
Of course.
But the source material makes a pretty hard pivot here. It argues this verse is just as much about the people as it is about the healer.
I think that's the most insightful part of this analysis. It shifts the camera from the doorway where Jesus is standing to the faces in the crowd, specifically the bringers.
The bringers, the neighbors carrying the mats,
Yeah.
the friends guiding the blind.
Right. And we need to remember who these people were. They weren't theologians. These weren't the apostles who would later write the epistles. These were fishermen and farmers and housewives.
So they didn't really know who Jesus was. I mean, not fully.
Not at all. Not yet. They didn't know him personally like the disciples were beginning to. They certainly didn't understand his full identity, his role as Savior, the Trinity, the crucifixion. They didn't have the New Testament.
They just knew he could help.
Exactly. Their knowledge was severely limited. But, and this is the key point, the source drives home limited knowledge did not lead to inaction. They acted on what they had seen.
They connected the dots. My neighbor's hurting, and that man can help. And they moved.
They moved. They didn't wait to understand the metaphysics of it all. They just picked up the stretcher. And this is where the source draws a very sharp, somewhat uncomfortable parallel to today.
Oh, I saw this in the notes. This is the ouch moment for a lot of people listening, probably.
It's meant to be.
Yeah.
The source contrasts these Capernaum villagers with modern believers, Christians today.
Okay, so lay it out. What's the contrast?
Well, think about anyone listening who identifies as a Christian. You claim to know Jesus deeply. You know his name, the theology of the cross, the resurrection. You have the full story. You know him not just as a healer, but as a savior.
So we have maximum knowledge. They had minimum knowledge.
Right. And yet, the source asks a searching question. If the people of Capernaum did so much bringing the entire town to his door with such limited knowledge, why do those of us with personal, deep knowledge so often hesitate to bring others to him?
Wow. Yeah, that lands. It's like we have the cure, We even understand the chemistry of the cure, but we're too shy to share it. They just saw a glimmer of hope and broke down the doors.
Yeah. Precisely. It challenges the assumption that you need to be an expert theologian before you can help someone. The townspeople didn't pass a theology exam. They just loved their neighbors and knew where the help was.
So what does this all mean for us today? Because obviously we can't physically carry our sick neighbor to a house in Galilee.
Yeah.
Jesus isn't physically walking around anymore.
No, he's not. So the source redefines the action. It asks, what does bringing look like in the 21st century?
And it clarifies that it's not always about physically leading someone somewhere, right? We aren't just talking about dragging people to a church service.
It can mean inviting someone, sure, but the source really broadens the scope. It lists practical examples, speaking gently to someone who is distressed, listening patiently, just pointing them toward hope.
It's the ministry of presence, just being there.
Yes. But then the source takes a really strong stance on one specific action, which I think is often undervalued, and that's prayer.
Now, I'll play devil's advocate here. I feel like sometimes people view prayer as the thing you do when you can't actually help. You know, I can't fix your tire, I don't have any money, so I'll pray for you. It can feel like a consolation prize.
That is a very common sentiment. We treat prayer as the last resort when the real options fail. But the source explicitly rejects that view. It argues that prayer is not a weak substitute for action.
So what is it?
It's a powerful act of faith.
How does it make that jump from, just thinking thoughts to powerful action?
It uses the Capernaum imagery. The mechanism is the same as the neighbors carrying the mats. When you pray for someone, really intercede for them, you are effectively picking them up and placing them directly into the hands of the one who can truly help them.
I like that image. Prayer is the modern stretcher bearing.
That's a beautiful way to put it. When we can't reach someone physically, maybe they live far away or their struggle is internal, and hidden prayer bridges that gap. It places the person before Jesus just as surely as those villagers did.
So it turns prayer from a passive wish into an active transport.
Exactly. And the source then challenges us on who we're willing to carry on that stretcher.
Right, because in the story, they brought all.
It pushes back against our tendency to only care for our immediate circle, our family, our close friends. The crowd in Capernaum brought everyone. So the source asks us to consider, what about the coworker who's struggling? The lonely neighbor?
The anxious student. The person you follow on social media who's clearly not doing well.
The anxious student? Or the person quietly battling temptation or despair? These are the hidden sicknesses of our day. We don't always see physical leprosy, but we see anxiety, loneliness, addiction.
Yeah, the question is, are we noticing? Because you can't bring someone if you don't notice they're down in the first place.
That brings us right back to the social dynamic of Capernaum we started with. They noticed because they were connected. The challenge for us today is to cultivate that same awareness, to look at people not as background characters in our movie, but as people who might need to be brought somewhere.
It seems like we live in a world that is so much more isolated than Capernaum.
We do. We have fences and garages and headphones, which makes the act of noticing even more intentional. In Capernaum, you couldn't help but know. Today, you have to choose to know. You have to ask, how are you really doing? And actually wait for the answer.
It really emphasizes that dual responsibility. Jesus does the healing.
But the community does the bringing.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't walk door to door that night. Have you ever noticed that? He stayed at the house. He waited. He invited his people to participate. He essentially said, I am here and I am able, but you need to bring them.
It's a partnership. He creates the supply, we bring the demand.
It is. The source puts it this way. He is not limited by our inability, but he invites us to carry others to him in love and compassion.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with this picture of a busy evening that changed a lot of lives.
A night where the limitations of the Sabbath gave way to the unlimited willingness of Jesus.
And the unlimited hustle of the neighbors.
Right. And that's the summary the source leaves us with. It's a call to be a carrier of others' needs, to be the kind of person who notices suffering, whether it's visible or hidden, and then acts.
It's moving from being a spectator to being a participant, from watching the crowd to joining it.
And doing it persistently. That's the final note. The crowd kept coming. They brought all.
So here is the final provocative thought for you listening right now. And this is something the source really wants you to mull over. It comes down to willingness versus ability.
Yes. We get so hung up on ability. I'm not a pastor. I don't know the Bible well enough. I'm not a therapist. But the question isn't about ability. We know we can't heal anyone.
The question is willingness.
Are we willing to bring all to Jesus? Not just the obvious needs, the ones that are easy to talk about, but are we willing to bring the hidden ones, the messy ones, the people who might make us uncomfortable? And are we willing to do it again and again and again?
Because in a small town like Capernaum, or a big city like yours, the news only spreads if someone is willing to knock on the door.
And someone is willing to carry the mat.
Thanks for diving in with us today.
Always a pleasure.